is one for the history books. It was a fun time when some of the modern day's most influential artists tore up the airwaves. It was a golden decade of music and fun. And even though I was born in the last year of the 90s myself, the 90s music was where it's at, and the 2000s, like, obviously I love 80s music, I like 60s and 50s, but like, something about 90s, 2000s, just because I was growing up listening to the music, like, I just love it. So, there was no war in the Middle East. The term terrorist was something only the media used, and even then sparingly. There were no worries about Russia. Bill Clinton was president and just starting to mess around with Monica Lewinsky. Then Windows 95 was released, changing how we interact with the internet forever. Yet it was not all fun and games. 1995 was when heat waves struck with a vengeance. Chicago suffered 739 heat-related deaths in the summer of 1995 in 5 days. Some reports put the toll at over 1,000. In addition, there were power outages, warnings, failings, and a general lack of preparation. Pollution and humidity further aggravated the heat wave. Temperatures went as high as 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Gary was hot as well. The city was well on its way to a record-breaking year-end murder rate of 130 murders. Most of it was gang violence. But before the stories of Darren, Dion, Van and David must rocked the region, one would contribute to the murder rate slightly differently. Eugene Victor Britt was born in Gary, Indiana on November the 4th, 1957. He was the second oldest of 6 siblings, born to the same mother and father. Gene's father's name was Alma K. Britton, Darlene Britt. Eugene has 3 young sisters, Elizabeth, Brenda Joyce Britt, and Darlene Joan Britt. Darlene Joan got named after her mother. He also had 3 older siblings born to his mother from 3 different fathers. Alma was 22 when he was arrested for killing a Gary woman in 1951. He ran over nurse Mrs. Rose Martha Bruss, 37, while fleeing from patrol officer Will Slepsevich, who tried to arrest him for reckless driving after almost hitting his motorcycle. The incident occurred at 6th and Broadway. Alma fled the scene, crashing into other cars, and was finally arrested after a foot chase on the lawn of Gary's main library. He got 2 to 21 years in prison, which was the max. Upon release, Alma became a steel worker, which economically placed him above most other blacks around Gary proper. Money was no problem, but Alma's past influenced his parenting style. Alma had a steady habit of cheating with different women on his wife, Darlene. However, Darlene was also a cheater. Eugene walked into his mother's bedroom at the home on the 17th and Madison at 5 years old. There he discovered his mother having sex with a man that was not his father. Shocked by the intrusion of her son and angered at the prospect of being ousted, Darlene violently chased him out of the room. Later, she would bribe her son to silence by showering him with the trees, which is just disgusting, like, girl. Okay. abused his children daily and also beat his wife. In addition, the kids often were forced to witness the SA of their mother, which is just horrible because, like, they're gonna grow up thinking that this is acceptable, this type of behaviour, and it's just awful. Like, it's one thing to do that and like, just to abuse your partner, but it's another thing to, like, make and force your kids to also, like, witness it, and, like, it's just weird, like, what the frick? It's just, like, just so fucking wrong. Eugene hid in a closet in his parents' bedroom during one extraordinarily violent episode of domestic violence. He watched his father beat his mother mercilessly with his fists and feet. Alma then tied her hands to the bedpost and viciously raped her. Finally, Alma ravaged his wife with varying degrees of aggression nearly every night. Eugene's mother bathed him up until he started high school. It is unknown if Darwin ever essayed him during those sessions. As he grew older, Gene would purposefully hide in the closet to watch his father beat and rape his mother, masturbating through it all. It is unknown if his father and mother were ever aware. Unfortunately, Eugene was not alone. The 4 Britt children were all exposed to sex and violence. The 3 Britt sisters were very close, too close, if you get my drift. Eugene had sex with them, as the sisters also had sex with one another. As teenagers, their parents would regularly catch all of them having sex with each other. The punishment was to beat them with thick electrical extension cords. However, the beatings failed to stop the behaviour. Yeah, because you literally made them witness SA. You literally abused your wife, and both of them are as bad as each other. I'm not saying, like, he's worse, but at the end of the day, they're both bad. Like, they're both obviously not fit parents. They are constantly beating each other up, you know, essaying, you know, and making, like, forcing the kids to watch, and then they wonder why the kids are turning out the exact same way and being weird because they're fucking weird. basically taught him that that's acceptable. Like, that's normal. No. He's mental age, he's like 10-year-old, so he's not going to understand. All he knew was violence, so he started practicing on the women he chose to have sex with. Ultimately, when a woman angered him and rage rose, he raped her. Sometime in the mid-70s, Eugene stayed with an older Hammond, Indiana woman. Her name was Shelley Hall. Shelley was a jack of all trades. If the businesses were on the streets, Shelley was a stripper, working at the White Eagle Hall in East Chicago's Calumet neighborhood. Shelley was also a female pimp, with at least 13 streetwalkers working for her. So not only was Hall a pimp, but she was also a drug dealer selling out of her Hammond apartment. Britt was in a sexual relationship with this grown woman at 14-15 and continued dealing with her until his early 20s. Being on his own at such a young age more than certainly affected the young man's mind, with a phobia of being out of control of his circumstances. Indeed, being invulnerable contributed to his negative habits. Also, with being mentally challenged, there's no telling how he was taken advantage of and by whom. The powers that be were not interested in providing the proper care for those who had slipped through the cracks. Therefore, young kids like Eugene were subject to the mercy of the streets. The environment of the Hall's residence was far from stable. Living in such an environment did nothing to quell Eugene's sexual appetite. He routinely travelled from Hammond to Gary's east side to commit rape at a very young age. Mental illness and feelings of rejection, inadequacy and frustration fueled rage. However, the more grievous the act of violence, the more temporary the satisfaction became. Gene was single-handedly responsible for several dozen rapes he was never caught for. Eugene SA's multiple women with varying degrees of rageful violence. It is unknown how many women the young Eugene attacked, yet Eugene would talk about a particular incident. One day, when his rage was hot, he found and took a beautiful woman from a deserted street in Midtown. She was submissive. Eugene, surprised at the ease of his catch, pulled the woman down into the nearest abandoned home, and they both went to its basement. There he stripped the woman of her clothes and viciously raped her, yet the woman remained calm through the entire ordeal. The calm and ease of the woman helped to quell his rage, and he went from raping her to, in his mind, making love to her. After the deed, the woman treated him nicely and calmly, making him feel what he thought was love for the first time. Eugene had a pep in his step. They held hands walking up a street. They kissed and hugged like boyfriend and girlfriend would. The woman looked at him with love in her eyes. She led Eugene around the neighborhood like a puppy on a leash. Soon they found themselves walking up an alley in the middle of the block. The woman pointed out the house where she lived and excitedly announced that she wanted him to meet her family. Excited at finally having a girlfriend and possibly earning his father's respect for the first time, he agreed to let the woman enter her home. Minutes later, the family members poured out of the house, entering the alley in an angry, foaming throng. Taking the rear of the familial mob armed with knives, bats and pipes, the woman pointed Eugene out. Immediately, a foot chase ensued. In fear for his life, Eugene tore down the alley. He narrowly avoided a vicious beating that may have ended his story then. same year, brother Eugene went to prison. Darwin and Carla had a child, a girl named Darwin Carlisle. The Britt family wanted Edward to marry their daughter, but he could not find work in Gary. As a result, Carla got ostracised and, according to him, barred from seeing the baby who lived with her maternal grandparents. Mother Darwin had to sneak Carla inside the house for him to see his daughter, yet this was unsustainable. Carla went to the military in 1983 and never returned to Gary after being discharged. Child services took the young girl away from her grandparents and into her mother's custody. At some point, her mother began to abuse drugs and neglected her daughter daily. All the while, they were jumping around from house to house until they squatted in an abandoned home in Glen Park in the summer of 1986. Next, on January the 4th, 1987, the girl attended Gary Webster Elementary School. After that day, Darwin Carla was left alone in the house and deprived of food, water, electricity and heat for at least 11 days. By January the 17th, a mortgage company had hired a contractor to board the house, not knowing a little girl was locked inside. As a contractor, Jeff Griffin began hammering on the attic window. He heard the screams and cries of a little girl from inside the home, bleeding. Please don't board me up. Griffin solicited the help of a neighbour, Jim Dykes. They entered the house and discovered drug paraphernalia strewn about a kitchen table and trash and ashes from burned newspapers. The girl was padlocked behind an attic door at the top of a staircase. In addition, the door was barricaded with a 6-foot refrigerator. The two men, Darwin and Carlisle, found her wrapped in a thin, urine-soaked blanket, wearing 2 pairs of socks, no shoes, slim corduroy pants and a sweater. She couldn't walk. Later, she was reported to have gangrenous legs and underwent a double amputation. The mother, Darwin Britt, got 14 years. The little girl survived this incident. So her mum got 14 years, even though, she deserved way more. She fully neglected her own child, and this child had to have both her legs amputated because of her mother. Eugene missed the 80s and was released in August 1993 at 35 years old, which is so really young. An entire year earlier than his original release date, due to good behaviour. What good behaviour meant is unknown. Eugene had a lengthy disciplinary record while imprisoned. The initial release date was August the 5th, 1994. Eugene was not rehabilitated. In fact, he was more dangerous than he had ever been. June was placed on probation for a year and lived on welfare briefly while at Pendleton Reformatory outside of Indianapolis. A discrepancy occurred between DOC, released him to Indianapolis, but his parole officer was in Lake County. When Eugene was released, he returned to stalking and raping women. Simplicity was his ally. He stalked his victims from the shadows of buildings or behind tall grasses and weeds. Once he got close enough, he'd grab them by surprise and drag them to a secluded spot, usually pre-selected, and beat and assault them uninhabited. Despite his mental limitations, he could get work, though he did not understand why he needed to work. Initially, he got a job as a janitor at Victory Arms, a Gary apartment complex. A perk was a free apartment, which Eugene took up. For 16 months, Eugene lived in number 505 and was always on time with his rent once he stopped working there as a janitor. As they passed each other, he spoke to her. "Where are you going?" A car passed them. As the automobiles disappeared, she sensed something was wrong. Before the woman could react, Eugene grabbed her by the neck and dragged her into a secluded spot off the road. As with the other woman, he proceeded to beat the woman senselessly. Yet the woman would not grant him access to her panties, no matter how hard Eugene punched her. The woman's tenacity enraged him furthermore. Finally, he decided to take the advice he got from inmates in prison. He needed to kill her. Incarceration had ensured that anyone who saw his face would die. His insecurities signified that while he was in control, he would never be rejected. Eugene placed his hands around her neck and squeezed as hard as he could. He pressed and shook the woman until she was unconscious, and then raped the woman with her panties on, fearing his time alone with her was quickly approaching its end. As he did the deed, she started coming to. He allowed her to regain consciousness fully. When she did, she looked at his face, enraged. He choked the woman to death. Really? Just because she gained conscious and then, looked at him, obviously she's gonna look at him where are you just gonna look? It made him mad. What? He took her clothes and body to another spot that he felt was more secluded. He raped the dead woman again, returned to his bike and went to work. The woman's name was Maxine Walker. Unfortunately, she would not be found until December 1995. An unidentified 13-year-old girl was raped under the I-80 flyover between Central Avenue and Clay Street in Lake Station, Indiana. She was grabbed by the neck as she walked the railroad tracks, dragged onto the expressway and assaulted. She was not killed. Arlinda Lois Smith, 46, was found dead by school children. She was face up, wholly nude, beaten with a blunt object and suffered neck injuries. The body that was in May the 9th, and the other one was in May. This one was May the 16th, 1995. The body of Sarah Catherine Snellgrove Harrington, 34, was found in a wooded area in the Carries Miller neighbourhood. A driver passing by just happened to spot her lying face up in the foliage. Police indicated no sign of foul play and hoped that a toxicology test would reveal the cause of her death. June the 12th, the mother of Nikita Moore, a 14-year-old, reports her missing. June the 14th, Tonya Dunlap was charged with criminal trespass at a truck stop on Ripley Street in Lake Station. June the 24th, Nikita was found in a field on the 2000 block of West 15th Avenue. She was partially decomposed. Her body was clothed with one sock on. Her clothes were later found on top of an abandoned building adjacent to the lot. No cause of death was determined at the time of discovery. Later found to have been strangled. July the 17th, family and friends last saw Deborah McHenry between 8 and 10 p.m. July the 18th, McHenry's body was found lying face up and nude from the waist down in weeds behind a garage by the homeowner. She suffered neck and head injuries, being choked and beaten. She was naked from the waist down, hidden in tall weeds behind a garage in an alley on the 2900 block of W21st Avenue. Also on this day, Tonya Dunlap was last seen by her family in Hammond. August the 7th, 14-year-old Johnny's A. China White was reported missing on her birthday at 6:30 p.m. half hour after she blew out the candles of her birthday cake. She had a learning disability and was last seen riding a pink and purple bike. August the 8th, police searched for Johnny's west of their home, yet Johnny's was found dead 2 miles west of her home in evidence by her brothers who conducted their search. She was face down, nude from the waist down, strangled and beaten in the head, suffering skull fractures. DNA was left on her panties. The FBI was involved, as the government believed she was murdered on federal property, Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. August the 13th, this morning, Michelle Lynette Burns, 27, was found strangled to death in an empty lot next to 2019 Broadway. She was a sex worker and carries 77th homicide. She wore Levi jean shorts, a black and white short sleeve shirt, and aqua Reebok sneakers. The fact that it took police to, not find him for so long is crazy. 77th homicide. What the heck? I'm speechless. It's actually insane how he was not caught sooner. August the 22nd, Sarah Lynn Paulson, 8, was riding a bike this morning in the parking lot of a church in Portage. An hour later, she was found nude, face down, strangled, and raped in a nearby wooded area by a passerby walking her dog. Paulson was left under a pine tree. A sandals and bike were nearby. We will discuss this incident a little later. September the 1st, Betty Askew stood in her alley, observing her backyard. At that moment, Eugene appeared out of nowhere, startling the woman. "Hey, how you doing?" Eugene exclaimed. "How dare you say the line from Friends? You are not worthy of that line. I'm sorry. Not coming out of a murderous or evil man." No. Betty did not answer. Instead, her alarm was raised and she began to retreat from him. It was too late. Betty had recently discussed the state of the house 2 doors south of her home. "I want that grass cut down. It's frightening," she told her sister, Augusta Abram. "Someone could be killed there." Betty Jean Askew's sister and ex-boyfriend Albert Smith filed a missing persons report with the police department after she failed to report to her job at St. Margaret's Hospital. Her brother found her back door wide open with the lights still on. Worriedly, Smith had decided to search the abandoned lots on her block. He discovered her body. Askew, 51, was decomposed in an abandoned yard 2 lots north of her home on the 500 block of Harrison Street. Her clothes were thrown all around her bra over her head. She was Gary's 85th murder. September the 11th, Grover Cleveland Barnes got into an altercation with Clayster McNeil and another unidentified woman after McNeil took him to the rear of Miller's Pizza that night to do drugs. They met each other in the parking lot of the Hudson Campbell parking lot at 5th and Connecticut Street. After an argument, Barnes dragged McNeil into the back of an abandoned house by her neck. Then, after seeing McNeil's eyes roll back and twitch, Barnes and the woman left. On September the 12th, Clayster McNeil was found dead by police inside an abandoned building at 2144 Massachusetts Street after the woman reported what occurred the night before. McNeil was nude and had a fractured spine and strangulation damage. While originally attributed to Britt, Grover Cleveland Barnes was charged with the murder. Between May and September of 1995, over a dozen women and girls were raped, strangled, and in most cases left for dead. The female victims were primarily black. They were discarded in fields, overgrown alleys, parking lots, and wooded areas. The method of their deaths was nearly similar. Most took place within the same general vicinity. This is a calling card of a potential serial killer. However, Gary police missed the signs. Of course they did. They've done fuck all so far, as we can see. Really, it's still at large and still happening. Time and time again, Major Barnes and the police were questioned about the possibility of a serial killer on the loose. They had this assumption, rationalizing that there was no direct evidence that the killings were connected to one person, even though they were the same, killed the same way. Okay, probably didn't care because they were women. Am I right? And they're all black mostly. So another thing, like, I'm not saying these places were, but like, probably because they were women, they were just like, and like sex workers and things, they were probably like, that's the kind of bias, and it just pisses me off. Admittedly, GPD had its hands full with a record number of gang shootings and murders unrelated to Britt. The police department was overworked, understaffed, and under severe scrutiny on almost every level of their responsibilities. It was so bad that the National Guard and Indiana State Police were called into Gary in a show of force that was unprecedented. Though the National Guard had no authority to shoot or arrest anyone, their presence quelled the steady rise of murders and general crime for a short time, yet they could not perpetually occupy the city. Meanwhile, women were still being found dead. It seemed it was a symptom of the sickness of a drug-ravished, poverty-stricken steel town. However, more and more minds felt deep down that despite this alarming rate of gang-related and domestic murders, something else was lurking in the shadows. A spirit of murder was striking out of the overgrown woods and dilapidated homes, protected by the social and economic chaos that created them. More affluent towns around Sarah's body was found within an hour of her being killed. She was left under an oak tree, strangled, raped, and sodomized. Little Sarah's murder scared the living shit out of Portage. Residents feared that a serial child killer was on the loose in their town. There was no evidence to support such a claim. No one suspected Sarah's murder was connected to the same person who murdered another woman in Gary, yet Eugene had been spotted. His description was given to the police, who immediately acted on that information. Meanwhile, Portage got busy supporting the Paulson family. Midwest Steel offered $15,000 for an arrest and conviction. Restaurants started fundraising drives for the family. Neighbours held candle-lit vigils. Across the country, the murder of Sarah caused an intense emotional reaction. So much staff was sent that they had to give it most of it to charity. But unfortunately, no such thing occurred for any child victim of crime in neighbouring Gary. As a result, Gary's woes were seen and treated as being in another world instead of right next door. People gathered at the crime scene. They even brought their own children. This began a campaign to teach the children about the dangers of talking to strangers. Expecting parents arrived, mulling over the scene with the neighbours of the Paulson family. People were still thinking about Tim Boss, the man who kidnapped, raped and killed a 10-year-old boy in Kankakee just a few weeks prior. Hearing about something like that in the community shattered their sense of safety. The security guard and manager hardly heard about the little girl's murder. They thought about Eugene, whom they had sent away just a few moments before the murder occurred. On a hunch, Miss Hubbard called the police. It was there the police learned about the coloured Hardy's uniforms. They kept the uniform obtained after Eugene close to the chest and contacted Gary's police. They agreed that Eugene needed to be surveilled, but however Eugene was homeless. Reports state he also his sister Brenda. During this time, I can't confirm or deny that. After Sarah's murder, he relocated to another homeless shelter on 5th Avenue, Prayer House, Deliverance Temple. This temple was headed by Reverend Clyde Smith and was only about 360 yards from the home of one of his next and possibly final victims, Betty Askew. While at Prayer House, Eugene listened to gospel music and read the Bible. He befriended Reverend Smith and they began to talk more about Eugene's early life of violence and abuse. Reverend Smith and others saw Eugene as a compassionate man of very few words. They did not suspect that he could rape, let alone murder. However, Eugene began to suffer from guilt. It ate inside of him like a festering cancer. The first week of September, police questioned Eugene about his whereabouts on the day Sarah was murdered. She gave investigators Eugene's uniform shirt. On December the 14th, he drank an entire fifth of alcohol, 3 40-ounce beers, smoked a whole pound of weed, and took a bumful of sleeping medication. Then, as he stumbled through the rough east side of Gary, he came upon an abandoned house. After entering the house, he gathered up wire hangers left there and fashioned a metal noose. He wrapped it around his neck with the other end around the iron bars of a security window. He sat down, his body weight tightening the makeshift noose and choking him. Finally, the metal crushed into his neck, and soon after he blacked out. After a period, he woke up and began vomiting, still in a drunken fog. He found himself at 4th and Virginia. He walked east towards Miller. A South Shore freight train appeared in the distance as he arrived in Miller. As it got closer, he jumped in front of the train. Instead of being crushed to death, the train knocked him aside a few hundred feet. He tumbled career of rape and murder was over. Eugene then arrived at his sister's house, Darwin and Britt. After seeing that Eugene was injured and asking questions, Eugene started a fight with her that was bad enough for Darwin to call the police on her brother. She evicted him and he was gone before GPD arrived. Darwin was questioned about Eugene and she provided investigators with his hardy shirt. Eugene returned later with workers from the Brow shelter who accompanied him is true.